Hello and a very warm welcome to the very first Dorset Life Podcast, which of course is a bit of a continuation of the former BV podcast, only covering the whole of the county from now on. My name's Jenny Devitt and it's my great pleasure to bring you this first Dorset Life episode for the month of May 2026 and a selection of some of the stories you'll find in the magazine online. Today's podcast will take us from wandering around the county with Roger Sewill and his trusty Dales packhorse Scarlet, from ancient hill fort to ancient hill fort. Well, they did the wandering, I just went and met them when he'd finished. And from hearing the views of Dorset councillor James Vitale about how, though Dorset residents recognise the need for more homes, rural areas face ever-increasing development pressure and local residents feel cut out of the neighbourhood planning process. We'll also hear from an anonymous Dorset grumbler asking whether we think someone on a £60,000 income really qualifies for subsidised housing. We'll take those in reverse order, but we'll start this podcast by hearing from Laura Hitchcock, editor of the Dorset Life magazine. Laura.
Hello and welcome to Dorset Life. This month looks very different. After almost 6 years and 68 issues as the BV, here we are as Dorset Life. It's not a decision we've taken lightly. The BV has been our baby, built from scratch in the middle of a pandemic on very little sleep, but a great deal of stubbornness and caffeine, and it's grown into something we're immensely proud of. Dorset Life is a title that carries decades of stories, photography, and a deep connection to this county. When the opportunity came to take on first the archive and the history and then the name, we felt a real sense of responsibility. The digital archive alone is a record of Dorset life stretching back years, full of people, places and work that might otherwise be lost. Being trusted with that and making sure it remains accessible and alive in a digital world is something we take very seriously. This is, of course, not the first time Dorset Life has seen a fresh start, but this time it's us who are picking it up, preserving what came before and building something new under the banner. This is not a continuation of the old business, nor are we starting from scratch with a new one. We're bringing everything we've built with us. And while our name has changed, we're keen to reassure our readers that the way we work hasn't. We remain committed to real journalism, asking questions and taking our time to report with proper understanding. We still champion the people, places and stories that make Dorset what it is. And of course, we will always be the home of so much Dorset glorious photography. Behind the scenes, the shift has been a lot. New name, new look, new systems, new everything, and all while trying to keep the magazine landing on time and in one piece, which is where the amazing Beeson and Beeson came in. They took everything we've built over the last 6 years, made actual sense of it, and reshaped it into something that looks both new and entirely right. We're looking pretty fancy if you look at the magazine. More importantly, they've held our hands through the slightly terrifying process of changing basically everything. So thank you, Gareth and Mel. We are looking properly swish. And if you're new here, welcome. You've picked a great time to arrive. And to our regular BV readers and listeners, thank you for sticking with us through the change. We know we're asking you to come with us as we turn a page, but honestly, we think it's a pretty good one.
Laura Hitchcock. And now that anonymous Dorset grumbler.
I sat reading through Dorset Council's new housing policy with a cup of tea going cold beside me. And by the end of it, I wasn't just confused, I was angry. Because when you strip it back, what it seems to say is that someone like me, working, paying tax, raising a family in Dorchester, could quite easily be subsidising housing for someone earning up to £60,000. £60,000. Social housing is scarce, and we all agree it should be there for those who need it most. Yet somehow, in a system where waiting lists are long, earn £58,000, and you're still considered eligible, that £60,000 figure is roughly double what many people around here are actually bringing in. So someone on an ordinary local wage could be competing with, and effectively subsidising, households earning far more. I don't see how councillors can defend that with a straight face. And then there's the local connection. It used to be 5 years. Long enough to build a life, put down roots. Now it's 2. 2 years? That's barely enough time to work out the school catchments, never mind establish any real connection. And once someone has been here for those 2 years, they become the local connection, not just for themselves, but for their families as well. You don't have to be cynical to see how that might be used. Meanwhile, families who've grown up here, whose parents are here, whose childcare depends on being close by, whose lives are tied into this place, are being pushed further down the line. I've got friends in exactly that position. One couple, both working, both local, trying to stay near their parents so they can keep their jobs and raise their children. They're not asking for anything much, just a chance to stay where their lives already are. But under this new system, they're competing with people who have been in Dorset since 2024, probably on incomes most local families will never reach. And we're told this is about fairness. Everyone agrees we need to reduce homelessness and use housing stock properly. But when our local policies start to lose sight of the people already living and working here, the ones keeping shops, care homes and businesses going, something has gone wrong. Because if local no longer actually means local and need stretches as far as a £60,000 income, I'd like to ask who this system is actually working for.
The UK is among the 5 countries in Europe with the worst record of green land lost to roads, infrastructure and housing development, and this was shown by satellite images taken in the years between 2018 and 2023. James Vitali is the Conservative councillor for Stallbridge and Marnell, and he spoke to me for the podcast on the subject of the loss of farmland and greenland across the county of Dorset.
It is the question, isn't it, when it comes to planning? I think there's another statistic that is often bandied around, which is that less than 2% of land in England and Wales is used for homes and gardens. So this is often put out as a kind of justification to say, oh, we can build anywhere we really want. Of course, it really, the devil's in the detail about where houses could feasibly be built, and also where, not just where they feasibly could be built, but where you'd want them to be built. I think the big problem we have is that the planning system is not very good at incentivising good quality development within existing settlements and conurbations. That's sort of the overarching problem, which is driving the need to examine building on greenfield sites now. And so, broadly speaking, what we're seeing at the moment is a pressure build-up in the planning system because we failed to support that organic, densification of existing cities and towns. That sort of build-up of pressure is being released by changes to the planning framework that are going to make it easier to build on greenfield sites. Just to round that point off, and we can take it in whatever direction you want, Jenny. I've written a lot over a long period of time about the need to sustainably improve and increase, let's just be clear about what we're talking about here, and increase the number of homes we build per year. I'm 30, I'm a pretty young councillor, and people in my generation are struggling to get on the housing ladder, and the reasons for that are complex, but one of them is a supply issue. We have not built enough homes to keep up with demand, particularly in our cities. But with that said, I am from Dorset. I believe deeply in the value of places like Dorset, and I think we risk throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as it were, and losing things of immeasurable, timeless value because we haven't properly supported much more organic and sustainable growth.
So you mean we risk losing more greenfield sites rather than building in urban or close to urban areas?
Correct. I think just to pick one really important example, London. London is where housing demand is highest. It's where we want people to live and work because there are extremely productive jobs there, and so on and so forth. And you'll see that London's performance when it comes to housing is, well, nothing really short of cataclysmic. It performs so poorly, and the effects are diffuse. It pushes pressure onto other parts of the country to get to the numbers that the government wants to deliver annually in terms of new housing. So one of the things that frequently comes up on the doorstep for me is, why should a place like Dorset have to lose precious green space because a city like London isn't doing its bit to address the housing crisis? And I'm very sympathetic towards that concern.
So what you're saying then effectively is that this is a numbers exercise, that London should be building more because that's where the need is, but because the algorithm or whatever it is says we need X number of homes, those are being parked elsewhere.
That's broadly my interpretation of it. And it is it's such a complicated subject. It irritates me that we only think about new housing and development and growth in terms of the quantum of homes we're going to deliver, and we very rarely talk about the quality of those homes and how they're going to integrate with the existing communities that we have, and so on and so forth. Because it's not just a numbers game. When you build something, you want it to last, and for the people that already live in those communities that are going to take the new housing to be proud of it. If you design a system which prioritises how many homes you can get on any one site above anything else, you're inevitably going to lose quality.
And so I used the word parked a moment ago to say, and I think that it seems to me that a lot of people, a lot of Dorset residents, particularly in villages and the smaller towns, feel that developments are being parked on and around their village and that they have no say in what's going on.
That's almost that latter part is almost the worst bit. I think, to come back to that broader national challenge thing, I think there's an intuitive sense that everyone's got to, play their part of adding density where it makes sense and contributing homes. And in many ways, that's how communities used to grow for hundreds of years. They would grow organically, 2 or 3 homes here or there, or 4 or 5 homes here or there. What's happening now is, as I said, that pressure release. We've got these big nationally set targets, and because we're not meeting them, and particularly because cities and urban areas aren't delivering properly, there's a sort of knee-jerk attempt to dump houses on the sides of villages and towns in places like Dorset just to get the numbers up. Well, that strikes me as not a particularly sensible or strategic way to think about housing development.
It's a box-ticking exercise, isn't it?
Precisely. And the target is sort of the tail wagging the dog. The government sets a target and we make really important decisions, or have to, I should say. I'm sure Dorset Dorset Council doesn't want to deliver the number of homes that the government's asking it to. It doesn't straightforwardly think it's feasible, but it feels impelled to grant permissions that it might not otherwise, such that it can reach the targets it's being set, which is, it really is a very short-term way of thinking about house building and development.
Given, James, that the housing numbers imposed on Dorset don't really reflect the county's population growth, which I understand has been around only 4% in the 10 years from 2011, mostly from inward migration, where is that growth coming from? Is it retirees and second homeowners, as is frequently said of the developments, of the people who move into the developments in the county?
Yeah, and I suppose your listeners may well know, but it's useful to just confirm if they don't. The housing numbers for Dorset, or the targets we've been set, they're effectively asking us to double the number of homes we're building each year. It's a quite remarkable uplift, and it's more than what is being asked of so many other places across the country. In terms of, on the demand side, who needs these homes? Well, frankly, everyone needs these good quality homes. What I wouldn't like is for Dorset to simply become. We are one of the oldest counties in the country. That's not going to change overnight.
In terms of population age.
Precisely. That's not going to change overnight, and nor need it. But we do want to produce communities that are multi-generational, and that, that's not just housing. That's about the sort of local economy we build. Are there the jobs to support families to stay in the local area? But again, it comes back to the quality point. What we really need in Dorset is a sort of a holistic discussion about what sort of homes we need to build to cater to people that live here and people who are hopefully going to live here in the future. I would like to see, personally, a lot more beautifully designed, place-based homes and living solutions for, elderly people. There's some beautiful almshouses across the county. There's some really nicely designed supported living sites. And what would happen, especially if we, again, this is not something Dorset Council has control over, but if we got the tax system into such a place that it didn't disincentivise people from downsizing, and I know that many residents that I represent would like to downsize, that would free up the space for families to move into those family homes. So all of this is just to say that this is a complicated subject, and it requires lots of attention, ambition, and engagement with existing communities. And the way that it's being treated at the moment is not with that complexity. It's being treated as a simple numbers game. How many homes can we build on any one site, and can we dump them in on greenfield sites, which are a lot easier to just build upon than the brownfield sites.
And of course, not just easier, but cheaper.
And cheaper indeed. That's right, yeah.
Ideally, what we all need and would like to see is people living and working. If they move into an area, they stay there and they make their lives there. They don't use it as a dormitory.
Yes. Yeah. There's a national issue, and I don't want to. This is obviously not a political podcast, but I think one of the other anxieties for lots of people that I represent when it comes to new housing is, for many years we've had a pretty lax immigration system, and the numbers of people arriving in the UK legally, we're talking about legal people moving here legally, the numbers are astronomical, hundreds of thousands of people per annum. And I think there is a valid concern that we are building homes to accommodate that immigration system, not to support young people who, born and raised in the UK to get onto the housing ladder. So this podcast isn't clearly about immigration, but that is another very valid concern that residents have. And I think broadly they would much rather the national government got a grip of immigration and got it to sustainable numbers, rather than fundamentally changing rural areas like Dorset by vast increases in the number of homes and estates across the area.
I think let's get off that soapbox, shall we? Because, as you say, it is very much a national political issue. But increasingly, I think we do hear, don't we, within the county, that local people, and this may well be true of other counties in the country, we hear that local people feel that their views are being completely ignored, overruled, while the character of the places in which they live are changed forever by what seems to be indiscriminate housing developments. Is that accurate in your view?
Yes, it is. So there's a few things at play here. One is the national government has ceased funding neighbourhood planning. And the second thing is the Dorset Council administration, as it is at the moment, in my view, hasn't quite moved fast enough to say how it is going to support neighbourhoods to not only contribute to the discussion about how their communities are going to change over time, but also to ensure that those plans that they come up with have standing in the planning system. So Marnell, for example, has just had a referendum on its neighbourhood plan. Great document, really impressive, really detailed, and forward-looking. It says, look, we know we're going to have to deliver some new homes. We think we can do it in a way that is in keeping with the character of the village, that won't alienate it or change it. And here's how it should be done. And it goes into real detail about what those homes should look like, what parts of the village they should be in, and so on and so forth. Really impressive community document. Now, what I'm worried about is when Dorset Council itself comes up with its local plan proposals, and when it makes that local plan, will the hard work of my residents suddenly become completely redundant? I think it would be totally undemocratic to have this system whereby villages and small towns, even large towns across Dorset, on a voluntary basis, put together these planning documents, these neighbourhood plans, to set out how they would like to see their community change and grow and develop, and then for them to be rendered completely redundant by Dorset Council. So I am worried about that. I do understand the concern that residents have that development is happening to them, not with them, and there are a number of things that the council, as I said, can do itself to make sure that isn't the case, and we still have this neighbourhood-led planning system.
And but of course, then people are rendered voiceless, effectively, aren't they? One of the complaints that one hears quite frequently is that all objections are if Dorset Council turns down a development proposal, the developers then take it to appeal, and they can afford to pay £60,000, say, for a QC, whereas the local people cannot do that, and so it just goes through.
Yep, I've been in the room when that's happened. I also sit on a a planning committee, and I know the advice we will often get given as councillors sitting on these committees will be, is this going to stack up in front of an inspector? So it's a very real concern, and I won't go into the technical details, but the changes that the government have made to the planning system weaken the hand, as it were, of residents and local authorities even more. The simple version of this is that when you're considering a housing application or application for housing development now, you don't take into account local demand for housing, which is is what we used to kind of focus on. It's now about meeting strategic demand for housing over a much vaster area. And so, for example, a small village might have delivered enough homes to meet its own demand for, a decade or so. But if someone puts in planning permission for another site there, they can argue that that site will help meet strategic demand, even if it is not sort of really needed at a very local level. I hope that makes sense. But what that basically means is, the concerns of local people are basically put aside in favour of much broader, wider concerns.
And another box ticking exercise, and one of the other issues which I think increasingly people are concerned about is the loss of valuable farmland. And given that we have to import something like 45% of the food that we consume in this country, every productive field lost is gradually eroding or increasing that percentage, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, frankly, we again, whatever your views on the politics, we had a really great opportunity post 2016 to devise a system as it pertains to our farming industries that was a lot more supportive of the sector. We moved out of common agricultural policy, and we had this idea of public money for public goods. So farmers would be incentivized to look after hedgerows, and in addition to delivering foods, which, as you said, is our food security is a growing concern, we could basically devise a much better system for supporting our farming industry. But I think what's actually happened is we've got to a place where farming is increasingly unviable as a way of life in rural areas, and for a place like Dorset, whose very identity is connected with farming and agriculture, that is immensely distressing and sad. And the reason why this is, like you said, is all connected to housing is that if a farmer doesn't believe that he is able to, build a life for himself through that particular industry, and big money is on offer to pass up that land for development, either to a promoter or indeed a developer directly, then they're going to do it, aren't they? If the margins are so narrow and it's so difficult to make a living, unfortunately, we will see more farmland being offered up for development. So, we've got to do a much better job at supporting our farmers financially, to make sure that they can invest in capital investment and make sure their farms are as productive as they can be. And also we've got to support them, as I said, to do the things that we all care about and take pleasure in, our beautiful hedgerows and paths and so on. But we presume they're done for free. They cost money, and we need to support farmers to carry on doing those things on our behalf.
So do you feel, given that 77% of Dorset is farmed, do you feel that the farmers, a lot of farmers do complain that they feel unsupported by the government and in fact almost penalised, according to some? Do you feel that far more attention should be paid to that priority of food production than appears currently to be paid?
100%. If anyone's read what I have to write about the economy, people will know that I'm supportive of free markets, and I'm generally sceptical about government intervention. But you have to realise that the contribution that the agriculture industry makes to the United Kingdom is not just about its contribution to GDP. It's so much more than that. It's food security, like you said, which is going to be increasingly important in a world defined less by globalization and harmonization and more by fragmentation and conflict. So that it's a critical part of any strategy for us to become more self-sufficient and resilient as a country. But more than that, like I said, there are a whole load of things that farmers up and down the country, but especially in Dorset, do, not for profit, but because they see themselves as stewards of the countryside. And if we didn't have those people looking after fields and hedgerows and footpaths, then they would go to waste, and we wouldn't be able to enjoy them like so many people in rural areas do. So farmers don't get the support they deserve, and I think particularly for a local authority like Dorset, we've got to do our very best to support them in areas where the national government might not be doing so.
You just used the word enjoyment, and indeed we hear comments from people, decision makers in cities like London, and the people who live in cities just regard the countryside as somewhere to go and play, to have time off, and there's a lack of understanding that the countryside is actually where food is produced. Look at a nice green field, and it might be free of cows at the moment, but that's because it's too early in the year to let the cows out, for instance. What do you feel about those sorts of sentiments?
Yes, so it sort of goes both ways. One is that I think many city folk or people who are city dwellers or city people to their core, so many of them will enjoy coming to rural areas on holidays, on weekends to see family, and so they benefit from a healthy and well tended countryside. But as you're suggesting, their relationship sometimes with the countryside is only ever short term and transactional. The important thing is the communities that live in these places, and quite frequently you will see policies made in Westminster and in London which betray quite a severe lack of understanding of what goes into rural life, everything from farming to housing, as we've discussed, but also country pastimes, hunting being one of them. There just seems to be a fundamental unwillingness to try to understand rural life in and of itself, and instead it's seen as a kind of a means to an end to, I don't know, deliver housing targets or whatnot. So yeah, I definitely feel that, and it's telling that the government is not populated by many MPs that represent rural areas. And that just makes it all the more important that local authorities in places like Dorset and their political representatives in Parliament, our MPs, really do their bit to be advocates of rural affairs and rural life, just to make sure that when the government takes a decision, they're made aware of the implications for rural communities.
So finally, James, I guess what can be done to try and arrest this seemingly wholesale gobbling up of farmland and green spaces in Dorset?
Well, there's a few things there. Some of those things are within the control of the local council. Some are not. But in terms of farming, the Dorset Council is responsible for the county farms, which are run, operated, managed, or variously by Dorset Council, and we need to have a long-term commitment to steward those county farms and make sure that they continue to provide the sort of first step on the rung for someone that wants to become a farmer. And I worry that these county farms may well end up being marked or earmarked for development, again, to meet those housing numbers that we discussed. So I think it's really important that commitment to the county farms as a important part of the pipeline into Dorset's farming industry is protected and maintained. Second, you've heard me speaking about neighbourhood plans. It would be really, really good to see Dorset Council come out and underline its commitment to neighbourhood-led planning. Development that happens with communities, with their consent and their input, not to them, and that will involve that will involve some commitment within the local plan to say that this is our plan for integrating neighbourhood plans. And then, what I'd really like to see is funding made available to communities to maybe engage with a consultant or an architect or a planner to help them build those neighbourhood plans. That is how Dorset Council looks at the pressure that it's being put under by national government to deliver homes, but says we need to think about what's in the best interest of our residents, and we think the clearest way that we can support them is to give them the tools to take control of planning for their local area via these neighbourhood plans. So that would be two things that I would really focus on. But just more generally, as a councillor, I try to support any kind of local voluntary community effort that seeks to raise the awareness of what's distinctive about the countryside. So one of the things that I've got involved with recently is the Marnell Heritage Initiative. It's a sort of history society, and it's wonderful. The thing they're really focusing on at the moment is our connection with Thomas Hardy. So I'm sure many of your listeners will be readers of Hardy novels, but Marnell or Marlott in the Hardy novels is a central part of many of his stories, but particularly Tess of the D'Urbervilles. And the Marnell Heritage Initiative is trying to raise awareness about this connection between the village and Hardy, but also the particular sites that are referenced in the book. Funny enough, a lot of these sites are fields, bits of green field that we hope are preserved and not turned over to unsympathetic development. So any of those projects that raise awareness about what's so distinctive about living in the countryside, I'm keen to support, and I know many of my council colleagues are as well.
Well, very nice to talk to you. And obviously, were you Marnell born and bred then?
Marnell born and bred. So I was. My parents were both in the Navy, and Marnell actually was a fairly good distance from the various bases that they were working at. And I went to St Gregory's Primary School, attended the church, got my first job at the Pure Drop-In in Marnell, and then I went to Gillingham Comprehensive School and then Sherborne before heading off to university. But yeah, born and bred in Marnell. But I was just drawn back really to Marnell. It was such a special place to grow up, and I think the real difference, Jenny, between as far as I've experienced between rural and urban areas is just the persistence of community life in rural areas, the fact that there's this sort of informal support network in rural areas where people on a personal basis, you can trust them, and people do things voluntarily for one another. That really is what's distinctive in my mind about life in places like Dorset, and it's just not replicated in big cities, which are a lot. Yeah, it's community, and it's very special. There's a wonderful quote that is one of my favourites. It's kind of, for me, is the definition of conservatism, but it says that most people experience change as loss, and I think that is very true in rural areas. A changed view or a changed pattern of country lanes is most people feel that it is loss, and the only way that you can really kind of address that is to give local people control and to say, look, we need you to help us meet this national challenge, but we're going to let you decide how you do it because this is your community.
That was James Vitali, Dorset Councillor for Stallbridge and Marnell. Chesilbourne resident and land agent Roger Sewill recently decided to take life really slowly and wander across Dorset from ancient hillfort to ancient hillfort on foot, walking with his sturdy Dales pack horse Scarlet. He did this not just for the sake of the adventure, but also to raise money for the Dorset Wildlife Trust. These were two Dorset residents I felt I just had to meet. Roger, of course, did the talking. He introduced me to trustee Scarlet at her stable. So this is Scarlet then?
This is Scarlet.
How do you do, Scarlet?
Hello. She is black with two little white feet socks at the back, and she's a registered Dales pony, which are the rare breed native pony. They're the largest, or one of the largest native breeds, and there we go. I'm just putting her little rope head on.
How old is she, Roger?
She's 10. Well, next month she'll be 10, so in horse years that's 10.
That's still quite young for a horse, isn't it?
Yeah, so we've got lots of adventures still ahead of us. and we've owned her for about 4 years. So I'll just lead her out, and then you'll see how she's not very tall, but she's very, very strong.
She's a very sturdy horse, isn't she? I can keep well out of the way of those really rather large hooves.
But the Dales pony was a horse that was used up in the Yorkshire Dales, originally as a farmer's horse, but then they carried lead across the Pennines, and was their role. And you can just see the size of them, the sheer sort of strength, why they would have been so suitable to that. So when Scarlet came into my life, and at the same time I was thinking of doing these long distance multi-day walks, I thought that's ideal. I've got one of the original pack horses, and I can start putting these adventures together.
Had you ever done anything like that before?
Well, no, never. I'd always had this dream of doing multi-day walks with a horse, but my first trip I did in 2004 with her was in late October, really the wrong time of year, and I tracked from my childhood home in Surrey, near Gatwick, all the way back to Dorset, so 200 miles there.
And I bet having left Gatwick behind, you were very glad to head west.
It was. I had the aeroplane, I went underneath the flight path to start with, and mile by mile they got higher and higher. But I was so unprepared for it. It was late October into early November. The days were set against us. The weather was horrible. And my body just fell apart. It was.
If I may say so, Roger, might have been a slightly foolish time of year to have picked.
It was. So I took 18 months after that and thought, OK, I'm going to plan this better next time. And that's where the hillforts idea came to mind, because I've lived in Dorset now for over 25 years, and I've known that there were perhaps about 10 hillforts in Dorset, but as I researched it, I started discovering there were over 30. And then my interest actually lay in what could I find in between the hillforts. So if I used them as sort of like beacons, I quickly figured out people would have, thousands of years ago, travelled in between. The countryside, the landscape perhaps would have been quite similar, and all of us would have changed. So I thought actually that's really interesting to connect them up. And I walk with Scarlet.
Because those hill forts would have provided the travellers with somewhere safe to rest, food, lodging, wouldn't they, presumably?
Yes, so I think the hill forts originally are safe places to retreat to when there's raids and things like that. And everyone
would there not have been people living within them?
But they didn't have water up there, so they were more defensive, I think. But when you do walk like I've done, or you go to any of these hill forts, and you climb up to the top of them, you suddenly see how strategically they are placed. They are commanding views across Dorset, and when you're on one, you can see another one, and you can see the estuaries of the rivers, like Maiden Castles, on the strategic place from the River Froome coming up there. And Egerton Hill, for example, you've just got amazing views right. It commands. When I got there, we got to Egerton Hill, and I wanted to get up there for sunset, and I only had about 20 minutes, so it was quite a scramble for Scarlet and I to get up there. But when we got there, and you look back where we'd walked over 100 miles across Dorset by that point, and you can just see every ridgeline, every valley, and you start seeing where I started really feeling where old travellers would have gone, and how to read the landscape for where water might have been or shelter might have been. So that sort of countryside landscape sort of infusing back into me was the closest I'd got at the top of Egerton Hill to thinking about how it might have felt for someone several thousand years ago to exert themselves to get up there, to travel across the county. So that was a big moment.
And of course, standing up there, if you'd been would have been Neolithic person, 3,000 years ago, you'd have looked out at part of Lyme Bay, and thought that the ocean just went on forever, I suppose.
Yes. So I definitely got this feeling of stepping back in time, because walking with Scarlet is a much slower pace than I walk myself, and before I've always just rushed along trying to get to one place or another,
as we do.
So this stepping back with Scarlet, and because there was a responsibility to stay with Scarlet because you can't just leave her, you become very aware of I became very aware of where I was, the time of day, where water was, what Scarlet was eating. And then, Jenny, the other really extraordinary thing happened was, because we were, perhaps Scarlet draws people in and she's a novel thing with all her pack on the back, and I'm walking, not riding. So many people just came over to stop to have a chat and ask me about what I was doing and where I was going. And that interaction, Scarlet, immediately people want to sort of say hello to Scarlet, but then the conversations start. And that gave me a real sense of encouragement and fun to meet so many people. So that kindness or that interest was really extraordinary, actually. And I think we've missed a lot of that. And then
And presumably Scarlet, who's having a lovely time munching away on this nice bale of hay, she is a very placid, tolerant sort of character, is she?
Well, interesting enough, I like to think that, but at times she can really tow me around the countryside, and I only lead her a little red rope head collar. So we have a very interesting relationship where at times she definitely takes charge.
She decides this is the way I want to go, and that's the way you have to go.
Yeah, no, interesting. We stayed at a lovely equestrian place that had a big show on at one time, and we definitely felt out of our depth when we got in there with lots of other horses all trotting around in circles. So I think the two of us like the hills and like the space that we've got. But as I was saying, the thing that then happened was I'd planned to camp most nights, and Scarlet got my tent, and I did camp a lot of nights. But a lot of people started saying, would you like to stay undercover, or would you like to stay in our shepherd's hut or something like that? So the hospitality, and then they came out with a plate of food or invited me in for supper. That hospitality and warmth that this journey generated was very special. And
the sort of you wouldn't encounter that under normal circumstances at all, would you?
I've never encountered. I've done lots and lots of walking in my time, and as a man, I might meet another man, and we might sort of go, oh, hello, whatever, as you walk past, but that would be it. But people stopping their cars, opening the windows, saying, what are you up to? Can I, went past shops and they came out with a carrot for Scarlet and sandwiches for me, or a meal in the evenings. It was a lovely
and
experience.
I suppose, Roger, as much as anything, they were wondering, why on earth isn't he riding that horse?
Yeah, I had that a lot of times. I even heard two people saying, why are you riding that horse? But I do ride Scarlet, but not with all her kit on, that, as you can see. But the walking part of it is so special because you are an equal partner, and our paces started matching. Our even footsteps started matching. And we got to places where we had some really difficult, most of the paths were really open, but we had some really difficult paths across one day. And we had lots of huge logs to cross over. And I've been some people want to take some pictures, and I've been trying to get Scarlet to step over some logs, and she refused, absolutely said, no, I'm not doing that for the camera. And then we got to this block path, and we committed to go down. And once we committed, I knew we couldn't get back. And I just let Scarlet lead, and she stepped over logs that were scraping her middle, through thickets. And each time we got over something, she stopped, she waited for me to scramble over, and then we went on again. And that, to me, was like a mare really lead, because mares are actually the ones in the herd that would lead that herd. So that mare, Scarlet, really felt like she took charge of certain situations.
Sounds to me, Roger, as if you learned to trust her.
I totally trusted.
As the creature who could read all the signs that you might not necessarily have read at all, the signs in nature.
Yeah, definitely. And she became so much stronger through things. She could drink what she needed, she could eat what she needed, and there was I with all my kit. She was carrying it all. So in the end, I think she was probably leading me around the county. And
she must have been delighted when you knocked on the door and she was able to help herself to that unfortunate person's flowers.
Exactly. So I did have to knock on doors, and that is exactly what happened at times. I rang the doorbell, and while I was trying to politely say, "Can I fill up with water?" She would be in the flower bed, eating whatever she could. But we got away with that. So I hope apologies for anyone if they came home and found flowers chewed. It was probably Scarlet on that. But something really profound happened to me, and that was I started thinking about why, over and above Scarlet's charm, why people were giving me so much attention. And I think in the end I started seeing that news, and this, interesting, that the way that information has changed in our lives with all our news apps and the way that it comes at us is so instant, and we've got access to the whole world, in our pockets.
Whether we like it or not.
But it's there, and lots of people saying, I'm feeling overwhelmed by all of this stuff. And I think for me what happened was there was a story that I was bringing with Scarlet, sort of stepping back to how information and news would have originally travelled with the pack horse trails and people travelling, and that potentially would have been very important information to rural communities. And so that old-fashioned way of face-to-face information storytelling, I've never seen that before in the way that Scarlet showed me on this, and I think that's something that we perhaps lost. I mean, it's important we stay up together with things, but that connection with individual people's stories and things.
So a traveller then was always somebody of interest. Yes, as you were saying, Scarlet. So a traveller, somebody who arrived from another village, would be a person of considerable interest and importance, because they would be bringing information, which probably grew in the telling, didn't it?
I think so, and they would become, more they came past each time, they would become more and more reliable. And as people, we are designed to read other people's faces and what people say, and to know whether we trust it. So at this age, where sometimes it's difficult to quite fathom out quite what's going on, so that historical way of information passing, the pack horse trails, I started thinking they are the old highway of information that would have crossed the country. So that it never occurred to me before I'd done this walk with Scarlet.
And of course, the wonderful thing, since you were doing this walk to raise money for the Dorset Wildlife Trust, every time somebody stopped you, I suppose that gave you an opportunity to ask them for a donation.
So yes, so people were really generous, and I had set out on this walk to discover nature recovery. That was one of my original goals across Dorset. So as a land agent, I've worked in the countryside. So nature recovery, I think, is so important, and I was really pleased to have Dorset Wildlife Trust backing for the walk.
Because you're not very far away from one of the jewels, or the newer jewels in their crown, Liscombe Farm.
Yeah, so I started. That's what I did. So I thought I'd start, as well as the hillforts, I'd start at Liscombe Farm, which is really close to here, and that's the new nature reserve for Dorset Wildlife Trust. And then I'd walk over to Kinkham, near sort of Powerstock. And then my third one would be to Wild Woodbury over at Bear Regis. And the importance, what's interesting for me is Scarlet, I love seeing the countryside. And as you can see, Scarlet here, she wants to eat everything she comes across. But what was so important and was things like water became really important to me during the day. And one day we nearly ran out of water. And things that we take for granted.
That was water for you and for Scarlet as well.
And so I started thinking, actually, these resources are so important, and the way that nature recovery is shaping up now on a much more balanced way, with farmers doing much more of growing crops, but also thinking about nature recovery. That was really profound for me, seeing it across the county like that. So yes, having Dorset Wildlife Trust there and met some of their rangers on the way, and they started telling me about the work they're doing was an important part.
And talking about nature, and I couldn't help noticing in one of the stables behind you, the swallows diving in and out. How lovely.
Yes, so the swallows here are really interesting for me, because when first I got Scarlet, I was wondering what we should do with her.
Someone has got a bit of a touch of a cough there.
That's not Scarlet, that's her friend. Yeah, so I remember one morning and I looked into Scarlet's stable and I saw
the swallows. So how many horses have you got here, Roger?
We've got four horses here.
And you ride them all, you and your wife?
Yes, me and Lucy, and we've got a young foal here, and then we've got our children's pony that's been with us forever. But if you look up in Scarlet's stable there, you can see a little nest.
So you have. Is that occupied at the moment?
Yes, it is, and they're flying about. And it was one morning when I came here and I was feeding Scarlet, and I saw that those birds just arrived, in late April, and it made me realise that they too were long-distance travellers, and they'd flown all the way over from Africa and the
all
other
of
side
about 6,000 miles from southern Africa.
Amazing, these little birds, and they got home again.
And they'd had to cross the Sahara,
So
which luckily you didn't have to do.
So my thing is, all the hardships I ever find, I think back of these little birds and think, naturally, I've got it easy. But that made me realise that there are all sorts of things that are effectively doing these long journeys and things like that. So they gave me encouragement or the inspiration right at the beginginning.
Roger, shall we move away? Because if they've got chicks in
Yes,
that nest, that we might be disturbing the adults when they come back with food. Or they might dive bomb us.
Yes,
Dive bomb
let's
us.
do that. Let's go back to Scarlet.
Go back to Scarlet. And a very, very sturdy rump she has.
Yes, well, very powerful, you see. You can just feel the strength.
Well, it's from going up and down those Yorkshire Dales, isn't
exactly,
it? All those hills.
Yeah. So she makes a perfect pack horse like this.
So they were only ever pack animals, never ridden or ridden occasionally?
No, they were ridden. They were ridden as farmers' horses, and you see old pictures of them carrying with someone there.
Weren't used to pull the plough?
Yeah, they would have been, because they would have been.
So they were sort of all-purpose ponies.
And they also, the history of this particular breed is like many horses. They got drafted into the First and Second World War, and because they were the largest native breed, they became well known for pulling artillery, and they got down to, because of all the horrible things that happened. You know, it's very tricky to talk about it, but they nearly got wiped out as a breed, and it was
because of their use during the wars.
Yeah, due to the war, and they all got either killed out there or left out there in France, and only officers' horses. You had to pay to bring a horse back, so horses didn't get brought back. So actually, the Dales pony, the history is well known for their role in the wars. And one of the things on this walk I wanted to do was we were going past the Tank Museum at Bovington, and out of sort of respect and the time that these horses, this breed, gave to the army, I thought I'd like to take Scarlet back to meet a tank, and not to glamorise anything, but just out of respect. And it's like when I came back from my first walk from Surrey to Dorset, we walked through the centre of Winchester, and there's a little stone trough on the top of the high street in memory of all the horses.
You took her down the high street in Winchester?
Yeah, all packed
That
out.
will have stopped the traffic.
It definitely stopped the traffic. That was on my first trip. We didn't know any better, and the route went through Winchester, so we just went through it. And there's a little trough there which says, to memory of all the horses lost in the Boer War. So all through history, horses have been used for warfare. And
so they were shipped out to South Africa to fight in that war too, then, in the late 1800s.
Yes. So all the way through, horses have had such an impact on humans, and war's just one of it, and I don't like that side of it, but I thought it was important to take Scarlet there and recognise what they'd done.
And so the fact that these ponies, these horses, were used in the wars, that's what's turned them into a rare breed, is it?
Yeah, definitely, because I think they got down to something like two brood mares left, or something very close. I'm not quite sure what. And I think now there's between 500 to 1,000 ponies like Scarlet left as brood mares.
Now this begs the question, of course, Roger. Had you ever thought of breeding from her?
Yeah, so I have, and I think I will. I would like to. But I've also got some adventures to do with her first. So
right, and once she's a mother, she might not be quite so
well,
keen. So where is the next adventure?
So I've done these two already. I've done what I call the long way home from my childhood home down to Dorset, and then I've done what I call hiding in plain sight all around Dorset, sort of looking at things that are there in the landscape that we just walk past. And then my third one, hopefully next year, I'm taking Scarlet back to the Dales, and it's going to be Scarlet Goes Home. So back to her birthplace, all the way up the Pennines. I thought that was...
And having learnt your first lesson with her not to travel in the late autumn, you'll presumably do that in the summer, will you?
I'm a fair weather traveller as much as possible. So if someone offers me a bed for the night or some help, I will take it. I don't have to endure more than I need to. So there's a lot to think about for next year. But this last one, that kindness of where people helped me, was so appreciated, and it made the journey, the connection with the people, as well as the places I visited.
So what's your best memory from this recent trip?
I think I've got two or three hillforts that really stand out. One of them, I think the first day, I'd had a horrible first day. It was pouring with rain. We had 40-mile-an-hour winds. And I went down the Dorset Gap and everything fell off Scarlet's back. And we ended up in an hour and a half of horrible tangle of mud. And then it took me a long time to sort it all out. And then I got myself together and Scarlet got herself together. And we climbed up top of Rosebery Camp at the top. And it's a beautiful hill fort looking across the Blackmore Vale. And I was feeling wet, cold, and was this really going to work on my first day, because I was feeling exhausted. And I met this lady who got out of a car. She'd been up there at the viewpoint having a cup of tea, and she said, "Oh, I've heard about you on the radio. You've made my day." And then she wanted to come over to see Scarlet. And I think it was that feeling of adventure mixed with meeting people that gave me the encouragement. So I think that very simple encounter, which repeated itself lots of times, but that first one, I think, turned it from a personal journey into something much more connected with the people and the communities that I visited. So I think that would be my strongest memory.
Your strongest memory, and the best, the nicest memory?
Well, I think so. That thing. I mean, people bought me cream teas on my way, and people stopped and gave Scarlet carrots. So
it doesn't sound as if you will have lost any weight on this trip, Roger.
I have got thinner. I mean, we were walking between 12 and 15 or so miles a day continuously. We put some rest days in, but I thought I would actually my body would start cracking up, but unusually for me, but I just got stronger and stronger each day, and my mind, I felt happier and I felt more and more with it, actually, so I was pleased with that.
The enterprising Roger Sewill and Scarlet, his lovely Dales pack horse, and I really hope we'll hear from him again after his next walking adventure. And that brings us to the end of this Dorset Life podcast for the merry month of May. I do hope you'll join us again in June for the next edition. In the meantime, this is Jenny Devitt saying goodbye to you. Bye-bye.